Okay, I'm here today with Dr. Jonathan Moore. He's been an expert witness since 2003. He's a medico-legal expert. He also spent 20 years working as a GP partner in Chipping Norton. His main clinical interests are palliative care, ENT and audiology, mental health, and substance misuse. He was also the lead GP in dispensing nationally and active in GP commissioning. So Jonathan's going to tell you a bit more about himself. So I won't continue with the biography any further. I'll just firstly say hello to Jonathan.
Hello. Great
Hello.
pleasure to be with you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for inviting me.
No, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. So as mentioned, we'll begin the interview just by hearing a little bit about your background and experience in medicine.
Great. Well, I mean, you've said a lot already, which is great. I basically qualified as a doctor back in 1991. I was at UCL. And then, very interestingly, I did my very first house job in Hereford. So the implication of and the effect it has on you being a newly qualified doctor has an enormous and profound effect on you. So Hereford will always be very close to my heart. The very interesting thing is that one of my best friends now, it was a nurse who was a senior staff nurse on the ward that I worked with, and I learned an enormous amount, and we became very, very good friends. What then happened is that she became quite disillusioned with nursing, and she left nursing and became a teacher. And she actually taught Lucy Letby, for 2 years. One of her sons was in the year above, and one of her other sons was in the year below. So she knew Lucy quite well. And obviously that has had a major impact on me, because right from the start I realised that she was known to that Lucy was known to this friend of mine.
Mm.
So after that, I went from Hereford, after spending 6 months in Hereford, to Warwick, and I spent 2 years in Warwick. I did obstetrics and gynecology, but also I did 6 months on the special care baby unit. So I did have direct experience of looking after very premature babies. It was a similar hospital to the Countess of Chester in that there was only a junior doctor and a consultant. And so I had an enormous amount of responsibility. It was the special care baby unit, so it wasn't a neonatal unit. So we were not really dealing with such premature or high risk patients, babies, but it gave me a lot of experience. And so again, I have an enormous amount of empathy for Lucy, just by my own experience of being a neonatal junior doctor. I then did ENT in Warwick, and then at that stage, a lot of my friends were in sort of what we call the golden circuit, where sort of Oxford and Cambridge and the London teaching hospitals. So I moved from Warwick and I went to Cambridge, and I did accident and emergency, which was a very interesting experience, because Addenbrooke's is one of the biggest A&E units in Europe. It's a tertiary referral centre, so I had got a lot of experience there. And then I did psychiatry, and then I came back to my own teaching hospital and did care for the elderly, with the professor of geriatrics for 6 months. I've always wanted to be a GP in the Cotswolds, so I did my training year in Stratford-on-Avon, and then I got my partnership in Chipping Norton. And the summary you've given is really just exactly what I was going to say, so I'm not going to go into much more detail about
Oh,
that.
that's absolutely great. I just should just clarify for people that ENT means ear, nose, and throat, which I've written down here is officially called otolaryngology. Is that correct? Is that close?
Otolaryngology, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, ears, nose, and throat surgery is what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
Um,
I
okay,
just to finish really. I mean, I basically was a full time GP for about 20 years in Chipping Norton. We originally had two little surgeries, and then in 2015 we merged into one big surgery. And I knew at that stage that I wasn't really going to be for me being in a large surgery rather than a small surgery. Um, and by that stage, my medico-legal, my expert witness career had sort of taken off, and it wasn't going to be possible really to do both very much longer. So since 2016, I've been what we call a portfolio GP, which means I sort of do a lot of different roles. So I've been a locum. I still do a lot of locums around the Cotswolds, which is very pleasant. For a few years, I did something called access hubs, which meant that if you needed a GP, you could get to see somebody on the same day. And I did things like out of hours, various things. And the other thing I have done in the last couple of years is that I've become the chief medical officer of an insurance company in Bristol. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So one of the standout aspects of your career, obviously, is your work in the medico-legal field. So this was something that I had never encountered until I can tell you exactly was the first time I encountered it. I was reading the Guardian article and Dr. Roger Norwich was quoted and they said he was a medico-legal expert and I'd never probably encountered the term before. So
Yeah.
could you explain what's involved with that and what your role has been over the years?
So effectively, I'm a GP expert witness. I just do civil claims, which is where if a GP is accused of negligence, obviously the lawyers and the barristers can't judge anything themselves. They do need a medical expert to come and give their opinion about the case. So effectively, I'm Dewi Evans is obviously a paediatric expert witness, and I'm a GP expert witness. The difference is obviously he does criminal, which I don't do. But yeah, I mean, I didn't know anything about it either, but I was very lucky to discover it very early in my career. The big problem for most expert witnesses is that they discover it too late, and it takes a lot of time to become established as an expert witness. So I actually discovered it when I was a medical student. I was somebody who loved doing I love the arts, and I much preferred to sort of I was much more arts orientated than medically orientated. But I came from a family of GPs, and I was very inspired by my father, who was a wonderful old school GP. So I had this dilemma: did I want to do something more along the arts, or did I want to be a GP? And I decided to go down the GP route. But when I was at medical school, one of my colleagues had started as a medical student. Then she'd gone to do law, and then she decided to come back to medical school. And she did. She specialised in medical law, and particularly negligence. And I happened to see all that it involved, and I suddenly thought, my goodness, this is really. I don't think I want to be a doctor. I'd much prefer to be in medical law. And she gave me the best advice I've ever had. And she said, well, actually, there's this fantastic role that you can have, that you can continue to be a doctor. And obviously, the most important thing is that you continue to be a well-established doctor, but you can be a medical expert, which means that you are involved in all the most interesting parts of the case. So you have the best of both worlds, really. So I was always wanting to get involved in medical law from very, very early in my career.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I know you've worked on a large number of cases in this field. So can you give us some idea of that and the kind of scope of where you've worked as a medico-legal operative?
Well, I think I'll probably tell you a bit more about the role of it. Your duty is to the court, basically. Although you're instructed by either the claimant side or the defendant side, the opinion you should give should be completely impartial. It should be the same regardless of who is actually instructing you. So what will happen is that if I'm on the claimant side, a patient will have gone to a solicitor and said, I'm unhappy about the care, and then I'll be sent the medical records, and I will have to assess the standard of care, and then basically I will then formulate with the solicitor what the allegations against the GP are. Conversely, if I'm on the defence, what will have already happened is that the claimant will have formulated allegations against the GP. And if I'm on the defendant side, then I would have to assess the allegations against the GP and decide whether or not they're reasonable or not. So that essentially is where you start. You've got to be very, very open-minded. You've got to really consider all aspects of the case. You've got to be completely unbiased. can totally impartial, and be entirely reasonable, and also not worry about what your opinion is, because if a patient is unhappy about their care, but you look at the case and you say, well, this isn't negligent and these are the reasons it's not negligent, the solicitor will be very grateful, because they don't want to take on a no-win no-fee. They don't want to take it too far. Similarly, on the defence side, if you take a look at the case and immediately it's obvious that negligence has occurred, they're much happier that you say, yes, this is negligent, let's get it settled, than to go into a protracted claim, and then in the end up settling a long way further down the line. A lot of the time, though, it is difficult to, and often cases will go some distance before they're resolved.
Yeah. So hearing you use these terms like impartial and objective, I'm sure people watching can guess who we're going to discuss later in this interview. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you mention, your job is the same, regardless of which side that you're hired by, effectively, or that you're cited by. That's a very important point in the Lucy Letby case, of course.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So we're gonna. Just want to ask you briefly about obtaining defence witnesses. So I know that you haven't primarily.
Actually, before we get any further, actually, I will say. So what I've talked to you about is just that I just do civil law. So civil law is all about money. So something has occurred. The GP has breached their duty of care. That breach has caused damage to the patient, and the damages are quantified in monetary terms. So in the end of a case that I do on the civil side, the patient is compensated with money. That's obviously very, very different to the criminal side. There are other areas that you can get involved if you're a medico-legal expert. So you can get involved in personal injury, which is something I don't really get involved with, which is where somebody injures themselves and then you quantify what that injury is, and again, they get compensated with money. But there are things like inquests. If somebody dies, there are coroner inquests. And then there's another whole area of regulatory, which is where if a doctor has seriously poorly performed or been dishonest, or then they are reported to the General Medical Council, and there are a group of expert witnesses who just do regulatory. So the question there is whether they are fit to practice, and if they are to continue to practice, they might be have conditions on their license to practice, or if it's been so heinous, then the General Medical Council will strike them off the medical register. Right. And actually, I mean, the GMC have been involved in quite a lot of aspects of the Lucy Letby case, of course.
And so, just on that topic, certain people have tried to contact the GMC and request that they take action with regard to Lucy's case. So it's difficult. It may be difficult for you to give an opinion on this, but how, broadly speaking, generally, how reluctant would they be, or how willing would they be to take, strike someone off or take serious action against the doctor?
So essentially, if somebody has a regulatory problem with a doctor, they've got to present. They possibly will do it through a solicitor. If they do it through a solicitor, it's much more serious. They can do it just off their own bat, but they do have to present something which shows that the actions of the doctor were seriously below that of the expected standards of a doctor, and that they've done something. I mean, this is way beyond a complaint. It must be something which suggests that the doctor is not fit to practice, and under those circumstances, then they will decide whether or not it's a case that they will take forward. A vast number of referrals to the General Medical Council are not substantiated. They don't take them any further, they just reject them completely. But if they do, then obviously they will take it further, and then a new process occurs, and obviously eventually, if upheld, then there will be big consequences for the doctor involved.
Sure. I guess we should say as well, while we're discussing this, that civil cases are what the hospital, the County Chester, could have faced and may still face in the future, as far as I understand it, given that there have been some what we believe to be quite serious mistakes.
Yeah. I mean, a civil case is, again, it's the gravity of what went wrong. Most things will not reach the level of a criminal conviction, and so things can go very badly wrong. You can make very bad mistakes, but you're not going to be judged. The consequences would not be that you go to prison or that you are treated as a criminal. You will simply have to pay. So in civil cases, the only consequence is that you would have to pay compensation to the patient for the damages that they have suffered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Understood. So I know that you haven't focused primarily on criminal court cases, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about the difficulty of obtaining defense witnesses for court cases, particularly criminal cases.
Yes. Well, I think, I mean, at the outset, being on the defence side on civil cases is very pleasant and very easy. I mean, often it's actually easier because when you come to the case already, there are allegations against the doctor. It's usually quite reasonable to be working with other doctors that you're defending, and so there's never a problem really getting defence experts in civil cases. That's not a problem at all. However, the issues in criminal are that the stakes are very, very much higher, and the potential issues are at a totally different level. So a very good example would be, people saw the first documentary on Channel 5 in the autumn of 2024, was the case of Renée Squires, who was a neonatal, she was a pediatric neuropathologist. So she was an expert on babies' brains. And she was involved in various cases of shaken baby syndrome. And I'm not fully familiar with the cases, but I understand that she was on the defense side, and the prosecution were very clearly putting forward that these babies had been shaken and that a crime had occurred. And she was very clearly of the opinion that there were other explanations for this, and that no crime had occurred. And she was very rigorous on the defense side. She was unsuccessful, but she was very strongly criticized for her opinion. And she was referred to the General Medical Council, who I think did take action against her. But even more worrying is that her employers, Oxford, which is where I'm from, didn't support her either. And I think she actually lost her job. So it had absolutely devastating implications for her career simply by being an expert witness. So because the issues, I mean, effectively you are defending a potential criminal, and there can be a lot of implications for that. And you think to yourself, well, do I really want to get involved in something where there could be wide-ranging consequences for me personally if this, well, in any way this goes. So the stakes are just that much higher. The other thing that's very, very important to realize is that the budgets and the monetary side of it is totally different, because on the civil side, you've got insurance companies who, if they want to defend a case, are willing to very adequately compensate you and make sure that enough resources are put into it. And on the other side, the prosecution side for a civil case, you've got no win, no fee. So provided the case is successful, they will be able to recover a lot of money. So there's never a problem on the financial side. However, the budgets in the criminal side are very, very significantly different, because the CPS has a very reasonable budget for prosecuting cases, but certainly nothing compared to the civil side. But on the defense side, you are entirely reliant on legal aid, and obviously legal aid is very restricted. So potentially, as a criminal defendant, the budget is considerably less. The other thing to bear in mind is that in civil cases, about 99.5% settle before trial. So only about 0.5% of cases in civil cases go to trial. Whereas in criminal cases, if the defendant pleads not guilty, then the case will automatically go to trial. So there's a much higher chance of going to trial, which again is not something a lot of experts are keen to do. And if it does go to trial, it's likely to be quite a long trial and possibly quite protracted.
Yeah. So just a couple of things I'd like to add. Firstly, Dr. Squire, you're absolutely correct in everything you said. I just want to mention that a lot of doctors signed a letter or a petition asking for it to be reinstated. And I believe that happened, but she never actually worked again.
Yeah.
I think she was reinstated in her status and her registration or whatever it might be, but she didn't work after that incident. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is I've spoken to someone who has been an expert witness for the defense of people in very high profile cases. And she cited many things that you cited, but one thing she also mentioned is, and this is particularly relevant when you're talking about basically all the criminal cases go to court, is that you face the serious potential of reputational damage.
Yeah.
Because in this case, you've got to defend someone who's obviously being accused of murdering babies and has now been convicted of murdering babies. So that stain can stay with you, or at the very least, you know what people are like. You don't know what they'll do, frankly. Once they know who you are, once they know what you look like, and once they know, you just don't know what could happen. And so it takes a kind of courage or willingness to accept the consequences, in addition to everything that you've mentioned as well. So
No, absolutely. I mean, I think going to court is the more I know about it. I've actually only, in 22 years, I've actually only ever been to court once. But even so, the experience of being cross-examined and what I was being cross-examined on was nothing compared to what Lucy was being cross-examined on.
yeah,
It is absolutely harrowing. I mean, physically and mentally, it is totally draining. And any time that you're cross-examined in court, the barristers will really, really put you under pressure. So that in itself is very difficult. But as you say, reputational damage is, you've got a really high risk of that. And again, it might be devastating. You might never ever get over it. So even as an expert witness in a high profile case, there are very serious consequences that are possible being an expert witness.
yeah. I always say to people, don't go to court unless you know you're getting paid. Try and avoid it under any other circumstance.
Absolutely. But even if you're being paid, it's you've got to be very careful. Yeah.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So let's talk about Lucy's case. What was it that initially made you feel concerned about this conviction?
So at the very beginning, I heard about the case, and at the time, I heard that this nurse had been charged with killing lots of babies, and my initial thought was that, my goodness, that's going to be very difficult to prove, and particularly beyond reasonable doubt, and there's going to have to be very strong evidence. And the other thing, that in the opening speech, Ben Myers said that they had an absolutely excellent defense. He was very confident and seemed to be. So it was one of these things where I thought, shall I get involved in this? Shall I be interested in it? And I thought, no, I don't think it'll amount to much. I remember thinking that was what my thought was. How wrong I was. So really, I sort of let it go all the way through, like everyone else. And really, it only, like when the verdict came out, I was initially as convinced as everybody else, and all the way it was presented appeared to be absolutely irrefutable. So I initially thought, my goodness, this is clearly she's clearly guilty. But I have to say, when I saw her and just the look of her, she didn't look like somebody who would be harming babies. So that was my first thought. However, the first really big moment that I had serious doubts was when I saw a interview on Good Morning Britain where Dewi Evans was interviewed by Richard Madeley and Susanna Reid. And I remember it very, very, very well, because as the interview started, it all seemed fine, but very, very quickly, I thought, my goodness, there's something very seriously wrong here. And I suddenly thought to myself, he is not acting like an expert witness should be acting. And bear in mind that I've spent 22 years interacting with expert witnesses, and just the whole persona, the way he was presenting himself, the way he was clearly very biased, he was advocating, he had very strong opinions. I immediately thought to myself, this is really, really, really serious. And I began to start having doubts about it. The thing I would say at this point is that and I know that it's quite trendy to, within 10 minutes, to have an opinion when you've had your cup of coffee, but I do think to myself that very quickly, as soon as I came across Dewi Evans, that I could see that there were major potential problems with him. And therefore, I think that the prosecution team, particularly the barrister, should have responsibility for assessing the quality of their expert witness. And if they can see that their expert is potentially deficient, they have to have some sort of responsibility. I mean, there's always been this situation where they say of barristers, it must be appalling to be a barrister who defends somebody who they know is guilty. But after the Lucy Letby case, I think that 10 times worse must be a barrister who successfully prosecutes somebody that they believe is innocent. And as I'm going to say very, very quickly, as soon as I had seen this interview, I always remember the end of the interview. I remember Richard Madeley coming to the end of the interview and saying, "Oh, Dr. Evans, thank you so much for all your incredible work into bringing to justice this dreadful woman." And I remember his reaction. And again, that again made me think, I think this is something that really needs to be looked at in detail. So I started immediately to research the case, and there was quite a lot of evidence available. In fact, despite the reporting restrictions which were in place due to the retrial, there was an enormous amount of evidence available online, YouTube, everything else. I was very quickly horrified by what I found. And again, we forget now quite how toxic the atmosphere was against Lucy at that time. And, you know, she had absolutely no support at that time. Nobody was supporting her at all. And I am very proud of myself is that I was one of the very first people to contact her solicitor. And I said, look, I do believe that there's been a miscarriage of justice here. I just on, and we're going to come to it, my initial thoughts of looking at the facts of the case. So they didn't need my help. But it did seem, and Mark MacDonald, before he was instructed, he did some interviews saying that it's incredibly difficult for a convicted criminal to get any support at all after they've been convicted, and it's likely that she wouldn't, nobody would support her. So I remember contacting her solicitor and saying, look, I'm a GP expert. I've got no neonatology experience, but if I can help in any way, then I will. But luckily, obviously, now I don't have to. I can be a supporter of Lucy without having any direct influence. She couldn't have a better team of people looking after her now.
So you kind of touched upon this to a certain extent, but what were some of the red flags from a medical perspective in this case that particularly stood out to you?
So I've got 6. I thought when you asked me this question, I thought, what were the things that immediately hit me between the eyes when I started looking at this case? So the very first was that there was no direct evidence of the cause of death. All the causes of murder were reliant on the theories set out by Dewey Evans, and a lot of them, obviously air embolus is the most prominent, but overfeeding, pumping air into the stomachs. I mean, certainly baby O with the severe liver damage. Again, it seemed completely implausible how this severity of liver damage could have been caused by Lucy Letby on a small neonatal unit without being discovered. So all the theories as to the harm of the babies seemed completely implausible to me, particularly as Dewey Evans was so adamant that there were no other possible causes of injury to the patients, either natural problems or poor medical care. The next thing which really disturbed me was Dewey Evans's absolute belief in his opinion that without that everything was caused by non-accidental injury, and he had no consideration at all of any other alternative considerations. And this, again, as an expert witness, seemed very, 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 very poor to me, in that he was not looking at anything wider than just murder. The next thing that really concerned me was the circumstantial evidence, because it was put very clearly that the Lucy Letby trial had been successful because there have been lots and lots and lots of different strands of circumstantial evidence, which, when sort of put all together, clearly showed that she was guilty. And I was very concerned that circumstantial evidence can be very strong, and there are situations where it's very, very strong. So, for example, if somebody lived in Exeter and there was a murder up in Newcastle, and they had absolute evidence from mobile phone data or from CCTV that that person was in the vicinity of the murder at exactly the time of the murder, and then after the murder went back to Exeter, then that would be very strong circumstantial evidence. But in this case, the circumstantial evidence all seemed to be that this very understaffed neonatal unit, which we relied on people like Lucy Letby, and particularly Lucy Letby, as she did masses of extra overtime, the main circumstantial evidence, she was there all the time, which of course she would be because she was doing enormous amounts of overtime. So I felt that the circumstantial evidence in this case was very, very poor. And then, as I said a moment ago, that I was very concerned about the implausibility of some of the evidence, particularly, as I've said, the liver damage, that really didn't seem to stack up. Even the insulin cases, because, I mean, the levels of insulin that were recorded were very high, and yet the babies only had a very mild hypoglycemia, low sugars. None of them were harmed. They all went home very quickly. So despite the very high apparent insulin levels, this had very little effect on the babies. And again, this didn't seem to stack up. The other thing that didn't seem to stack up was the fact that if you put, I'm a GP and I've very sadly been involved with several insulin suicides. And in insulin suicide, what you do is you put a Ventolin in your arm and you inject yourself with neat insulin. But in this case, what they were doing was putting insulin into the bag, which was going to dilute the insulin so much that it seemed implausible that you could get such high levels of insulin, not to mention all the other things which have subsequently occurred. And then sort of overfeeding and air in the stomach, again, seemed, even at the time, very implausible.
Just to mention on the insulin briefly, I mean, I have been told that there's just no evidence that would be pharmacologically active. It has never been demonstrated. It's not, I don't even know if it's an allegation that's ever been made anywhere else, anywhere in the world at any time previously. So it's not something that's been demonstrated. Leaving aside the fact we've obviously discussed on this channel, probably discussed again numerous times, obviously it's hypothetical because they haven't kept the bags, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But even if they did have the bags, it's not necessarily, pharmacologically feasible that this caused the effects that you mentioned. So I just
Well, I
thought,
mean, the only problem with it, because of course Colin Campbell is an insulin case, isn't it?
yes.
Um, I actually went to the Colin Campbell Court of Appeal trial in May. I actually
Okay.
sat in sat in the courtroom and saw it. Um, Again, I don't really want to go into it, but I mean, it seems that unfortunately, again, he, the defense didn't seem to do a very good job at all. But
An
yeah.
understatement, I think. I mean,
Um,
they made some major blunders in my view, but
yeah.
what can
Yeah.
you?
The next thing that really concerned me was the personality of Lucy Letby. I mean, there seemed to be absolutely nothing in her background or anything about her. The fact that she was a very conscientious, very keen, ambitious neonatal nurse who clearly was very, very interested in her job, and why she, the, the whole trial, it never really question what her motive was or why she would have done it. And so again, this was a big area that I just found very difficult to comprehend. And then of course the final thing which absolutely gobsmacked me and gobsmacked everyone was the fact that no expert evidence was called in her defense. And obviously I just at the time couldn't understand that at all and thought, well, obviously she had no chance if she had no uh, expert evidence to defend her. So those were the initial thoughts that I had. That those were the initial red flags that made me think this is a definite miscarriage of justice.
Yeah. I guess what I'll just expand on slightly is the motive thing. So for me, that was a very strong initial red flag. Is that I knew this woman did not in any way, even when I knew almost nothing about her, I knew there's no way that she fits the profile of someone who's going to kill babies. And then um, when I watched Panorama on the first day of the conviction, it was literally on the day of the conviction, it was broadcast. They got Dr. David Wilson on, who I have no respect for whatsoever now. But at the time, he was saying she doesn't fit the profile of a serial killer. You know, she's socialized, she's normal, and the more we've got to know about her, the more we can see. There's just it just doesn't make any sense. That
Yeah,
fundamentally, this whole indictment and the allegations, they just don't make sense. Like, what did she get out of it? Why would she do this? She's dedicated her entire life. She's the most dedicated nurse. We know now, for example, that when she was studying, other nurses, will go out partying. I'm sure they still work very hard. But Lucy be in bed at 11 o'clock, up the next day, ready to study. And now apparently she does that in prison. She's like the model prisoner now.
yes,
So why would she do that? We know from the earliest age that she wanted to be a nurse. That's the only thing she ever wanted to do. It's the only career she ever wanted. She dedicated herself to 100%. She was very ambitious. She was regarded very highly on the unit. She doesn't gain from these murders in any way. There's no indication of any psychological deterioration in her whatsoever. There's no indication of any red flags that you'd associate with murder. As you said, the prosecution didn't even attempt to put forward a motive for why she did it. They sort of tried to make this pathetic allegation about, this doctor and she supposedly had a crush on him. I mean, they didn't even really. It was rather a half-hearted attempt. I don't think they really believed it, and that's been dropped completely now because it just has no credibility. So when you put all those things together, why would she do this? What possible reason would there be for her to do this? So that for me was immediately a massive red flag.
but it was the whole prosecution was an absolute personal assassination on her personality. I mean, it just was hideous. None of it was relevant to actually murdering babies. When you are when you are in court prosecuting a criminal trial, you must look at the how the actual mechanism of how the murders were carried out and look forensically at the actual crime. They spent hours and hours going into sort of her Facebook, her social media, even this absolutely ridiculous thing about going commando and Nicholas Johnson spending a sort of an hour asking her about her understanding of the word going commando. All this sort of thing is just completely peripheral. And again, it just sort of hoodwinked the jury, but was entirely irrelevant to the actual crimes that were being tried.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favourites, as people know from watching this channel, is the handover sheets.
Yes.
Of course, they're completely irrelevant. Even if she did take them home deliberately, for which there is no proof whatsoever, and it's extremely unlikely that she did that. So what? What does that have to do with anything? That would be an irresponsible act that may,
Yeah.
maybe a disciplinary offence. It's nothing to do with the indictment.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
So I just find that I find I'm start. I mean, obviously I'm used to it now because I've been studying it for over 2 years. But when I initially began to look at this, I was shocked by what can go into a court case with the most serious consequences, and it's just well, I think the expression that used to be used when I was younger is that it's rhubarb. It's just total, it's absolute
Yeah.
rubbish. It just has nothing to do with the case. You're just wasting the time of the jury and wasting the time of the court, essentially. So you're not wasting the time because you're trying to manipulate the jury. It's basically just a manipulation, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, and that is absolutely wrong. And the judge should have been very much harder on it, and he should have stopped this sort of level of this, this sort of questioning, because it was entirely irrelevant, and it was, as you say, manipulating the jury, but on completely irrelevant matters.
Hmm. Absolutely. So let's discuss another topic that I know you wanted to mention, which is the kind of personal impact that all of this had. So let's go through the whole timeline. Lucy's taken off the unit. Lucy effectively loses her job. Lucy's arrested. Lucy's banned from being in Cheshire. So that's why we only ever see one police arrest, because she wasn't arrested from her own house again. She wasn't allowed to go to her own house. She wasn't even allowed to reside in the county of Cheshire. So then she's arrested a second time. Then she's arrested a third time. Then she's denied bail. Then she's obviously got to go through the process of preparing a case from prison. She's imprisoned. They always describe it as being on remand, but effectively you're just in prison. So, I mean, let's call it what it is, effectively. And then she's got to go through all this experience, all this trauma. Um, so I know that you want to talk about the personal impact of that on Lucy and the consequences for the trial
Yeah,
and the preparation of the trial.
absolutely. I mean, I think the two things I really want to talk about now is that people just realise and empathise, if when she is exonerated, and when this is seen as one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in UK history, just what it must be like for an innocent neonatal nurse who really has not, just the whole sort of dawning of the enormity of what happened to her. So we obviously know the very first arrest in July 2018, and obviously everything that happened from then. But I think November 2020, when she was denied bail, and suddenly, and I think again, this came as an enormous, I mean, you may know more than I do about it, but the circumstances of it, but I think she wasn't expecting to be denied bail and that she would have to go to prison. I think it came as a, I mean, it couldn't have been a complete shock to her, but she wasn't expecting it. And suddenly, in November 2020, she went into prison. And of course, it is extraordinary, but she has never left prison since that time. In fact, one of the reasons we're having the protest outside the CCRC at the end of this week is because it will be 5 years this month since she was imprisoned. And the other thing we heard at the initial speech in her trial was that while she was on remand, she went to 5 different prisons. So she spent a lot of time going to different prisons and had just the most extraordinarily difficult time when you consider her background and the quiet. She's been described as painfully shy. She was a very private person. To suddenly be this sort of monster on remand who was accused of just the most appalling crimes. But then when I think about preparing for trial. Now, I've only actually been to trial once, but on at least a dozen occasions, we've got right to the doors of the court, and we've been absolutely ready to go to trial. In civil cases, we spend hours and hours preparing every single possible eventuality when we're looking at at the trial that we're facing. Now, when you're in prison, she would only have very, very limited amount of time with her legal team. She'd probably have to do a lot of it over the telephone. It really would be incredibly difficult. And of course, I come from this knowing all about the legal process. She was a neonatal nurse. She had absolutely no idea what a criminal trial would involve. And of course, it was all completely unknown to her. So the sort of the emotional and the psychological impact that this had on her, and just the sheer loneliness, because she was in prison entirely by herself and had very, very little contact with other people directly, visiting probably very limited, telephone again very limited. And of course, she's not yet been convicted, and she has nearly 2 years in prison as a potentially innocent person. There was a very good YouTube channel with somebody I've never come across before. She actually mentioned you and was very highly. But she was talking about sort of habeas corpus, that people should not be kept in prison for any length of time unless they are guilty. And the fact that, I know it was the time of COVID, so that made things more difficult. But to be 23 months on remand was in itself just absolutely horrendous.
Yeah. One thing that I should mention that just came to mind as you were discussing that is, well, there's a couple of things. But the first thing is, it's not only, I mean, imagine what it's like having that hanging over your head. And you're just in prison every day, and you know, I'm going to go to trial. This is going to be headline news all over, definitely. That's obviously to some extent it was already headline news before the trial, but you know, we've all been in the situation of having something hanging over our heads for a certain period of time, but usually it's something like a driving test or something
Yeah.
relatively mild. This is terrible. I mean, it must be utterly terrible. Every day is like you're living in a nightmare. You know,
And she didn't really know what was coming. I mean, she just had no idea. I don't imagine she'd had any dealings with the criminal justice system of any sort, and therefore it was a complete unknown. And I actually done a little bit of preparation about what it must have been like the very first day of the court, and I'm going to talk to you about what the atmosphere in the court was like. But just imagine the very first time you're in the dock, you're looking around this sort of courtroom full of people. You've no idea who they are. You've no idea what any of their jobs are. It must have been just utterly and completely terrifying. And I just don't know how she had the strength of will to do it.
yeah.
It's incredible.
I mean, it should be said that while we're on this topic, that she doesn't have to be put in the witness box. You
Mm.
know, as an example, what's that guy called who the rapper who's just been is on all the sex trial charges? Can't
Oh
remember.
yeah, yeah, I know,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
yeah, people who know more about more, it's P Diddy, isn't it? Yeah, I was thinking it's Sorry to Kanye, it's not Kanye. It's P Diddy, isn't it? Whatever he's called.
That's right, yeah,
He didn't appear. He didn't say a single word during his trial.
yeah.
He was there, obviously, but he didn't say a single word. Lucy doesn't have to go in the witness box. So that's another reason. There are many other reasons, of course, but that's another reason why some of the kind of commentary on her conduct and behaviour and how well she fared in the witness box, that's yet another reason why it's extremely unfair. Because she doesn't have to do that. She doesn't have to go in the witness box. She could just leave it to her defence. And then the other thing I want to mention, I know you'll agree with this. Um, we've heard this kind of idea from people that wish to defend the conviction that, oh, Lucy has to instruct her lawyer, and Lucy has to decide about this, and Lucy has to decide about that. Of course, the chances of Lucy running her own defense strategy from prison, zero. I mean, obviously, it's going to be left to her barrister, a court-appointed and experienced barrister, to run the legal strategy. She's not saying it's not like they've had some conversation. We're going to get into this later on in more depth, but it's not like Ben Myers is saying to Lucy, "Oh, we should definitely call Michael Hall," and like Michael Hall's going, "Well, and Lucy's going, well, I overruled that. We're not going to call Michael Hall because of this strategy that I put in place." Total
Of
rubbish. He just rubber stamps whatever the barrister says. Um,
course,
it's obvious. It's just obvious. But I just find it laughable when I hear that particular
I
answer.
know. I mean, of course, she's going to be guided absolutely entirely by Ben Myers. She's not going to make any decisions, or if he's anything he suggests, she's going to go along with because he's very experienced and she knows absolutely nothing at all about the criminal legal process. But I agree with you. Everyone keeps saying, well, it was Lucy Letby's decision as to what was to happen. Well, no. I mean, obviously, she had to rubber stamp what was, but she would have only taken the advice that she was given. She certainly wouldn't be coming up with her own strategy. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So the other two things I wanted to have a quick word about was, firstly, as I said a bit earlier, was that the impact of being cross-examined. As I say, I've only been cross-examined for one half day, for an afternoon. I was in the witness box in this trial. I mean, it was the patient had died as a consequence, so there was quite a big impact, but obviously nothing compared to being accused of killing babies. Um, and as I say, the pressure that you feel under in cross-examination is intense, and it actually has a physical. I mean, I literally felt physically completely drained afterwards, not to mention the mental impact. And
Mm.
as I say, I did it for half a day, and I remember that evening I felt absolutely completely washed out. Now Lucy, I think, is the longest. I think she was 17 days in the witness box.
Mm.
I mean, obviously not consecutive, but she spent a total of 17 days, morning and evening, under the most intense pressure. I mean, Nicholas Johnson was a really brutal KC, and he really set upon her. And actually, I've watched some of the transcripts, and I've thought, well, how would I have fared? And I don't think I would have. I would have been probably worse. I think her performance was actually incredibly good, incredibly impressive for somebody who had absolutely no experience of cross examination. She would not have been able to practice it. She would have had just about no experience whatsoever. So, in the circumstances, she was utterly incredible and amazing. And then the other thing I did want to bring up was just the fact that she was in Lower Newton Prison, which I think is about 2 hours from Manchester. Certainly, if it's not 2 hours in actual travel time, it was certainly 2 hours in terms of by the time she had to. So she had to get to the prison by the court started at 10 o'clock each morning. So she'd have had to be there about 9 o'clock. She probably would have had to have left the prison by about 6 o'clock in the morning. And that means she would have had to have been up at about 5 every morning to make sure that she was ready to leave the prison at the right time. Prison vans are incredibly claustrophobic. They're very uncomfortable. I'm reliably informed by somebody who has direct experience of it. So to have 2 hours each day in a prison van all by yourself, nobody to talk to, no windows, nothing to look out at, no idea where you are. Obviously, when you get to the prison, when you get to the court, there are press outside. They could be sort of trying to take pictures of you. There may be people shouting, and so you're in a horribly hostile environment. And then, of course, then at the end of the day, having to go back. And then what do you face? You're facing a prison cell and just the worst possible living conditions. I mean, at least when I was cross-examined, I only did it for half a day, and I went back to a lovely hotel room. I had a nice meal, and and I had people to talk to, and I had my legal team I could speak to.
Of course,
She had none of this at all.
you knew that you weren't going to prison anytime, which
Exactly.
obviously
Yeah.
helps.
So
Um,
I mean, just to be, and of course, 10 months of travelling to and from the court from prison must have been just unbelievable, really, for her.
hmm. And I mentioned when we were talking that there comes a point when Lucy is convicted. So, they march her away. They've told her you'll never be able to appeal. You'll never be eligible for parole. This is it. Your life's in prison the rest of your life. Then she's, frog marched out of the court in handcuffs, put in the police van. And then I've seen these scenes of her being driven away, and you get all the paparazzi, pointing their cameras into the window in the vain hope of trying to get a picture of her, which I don't think anyone did, because I've never seen one. Um, and you probably there's roadblocks and all kind of. Can you imagine what it's like? I mean, this girl has been through a level of trauma that I don't think we can understand. I mean, I wouldn't. It would be insulting to say that we could understand what it's like, or even attempt to understand. It boggles the mind, and that's why I will never stop until this is done, because I can't. I don't think I can try to empathize, but I don't think I can truly empathize with the circumstances she's been through. But I just hope if I was in similar circumstances, which hopefully will never happen, I just hope someone would stick up for me. And I'm in a position to do it, so I'll just keep going until it's over. But we'll never be able to truly compensate for what she's been through. It's just awful. I don't think there's anything you could, even if she was given £1 billion, or unless someone invents a time machine and allows her to go back in time, that's the only way you could ever
Yeah,
compensate. There is
exactly.
nothing else you could do.
No,
Um,
I'm very grateful to you for the opportunity to actually air this, because I think people can easily sort of undervalue just the sheer colossal enormity of the psychological impact that this has had on her, and how anyone can even face up to something with the enormity of this is just mind-boggling. And just to say how well she coped with it, really, because she did cope with it incredibly well, and particularly when people are rude about her performance. I mean, Judith Moritz would never have stood up to it in the way that she did, despite being so critical of her.
yeah, I agree. I think she also behaved with a lot of dignity in
Yeah,
obviously enormously difficult situation. So, I mean, if I was in the retrial when they this jumped up case about Child K, and this jumped up retrial that doesn't even need to happen, that's just purely to keep people quiet, in my opinion. Um,
exactly.
she's there in court. If I was facing Nick Johnson, I would not have been as composed as she was. Because what have you got to lose anyway? You've 14 life sentences. I mean, I would have told him what I thought of him. I'm certain I would have done. I'm certain I would have done. I would have said, because he's saying this, that, and the other. I was like, do you know what it's like?
Yes,
I'm completely innocent of these charges, and I'm going through this trial, and it's your fault. It's your fault that I'm here, and you don't feel any recrimination about that. And now you're here trying to prosecute me on this trial, and it's all based on complete. I mean, I just would have given him an absolute hammering. Because what you got to lose? Okay, you got 15 life sentences anyway. But I think the way she did it was probably more mature and more sensible. But I would have wanted my say, and
mm,
because everyone hates me anyway, as far as I know. So, well, it's not like I could make myself look worse.
mm.
But I think it's extraordinary that she just went through the trial. She did what a barrister told her to do. She answered the questions, then she just very quietly at the end said, "I'm innocent," and walked off. I
That's
mean,
right. I think that was so powerful, isn't it? At the very end, just before she was taken down, just to turn to everyone and put her arms out and said, "I am innocent," and that was incredibly dignified. It was incredibly powerful. And again, it gave me even more respect if I didn't have enough already for her. I just thought that was
it's
such a
poignant.
classy way to behave. Really, just
Mm.
such a classy way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of the trial of Lucy Letby, you attended this.
Yeah.
I know you have many recollections to share of that experience, so please feel free to speak as long as you wish about it.
Yeah, well, I will. I will. I mean, when I heard that the second trial was going ahead, because I was never quite sure that it would go ahead, and it was announced it was going to go ahead, and she was going to be attending, and she was going to be cross-examined again. I thought, oh my goodness! I thought I really, really want to attend this trial. Now, luckily, I didn't even know about this Court 8. That in fact, although everything happened in Court 7 at Manchester Crown Court, the public gallery and the press and everyone were actually in court 8 and were watching on a TV screen. And I'm quite, I enjoy going to court, and I say I went to the Colin Campbell one recently, and I find it very interesting to go attend trials because it's good for my CP, it's good for my personal development as an expert. So I thought, well, I'm just definitely going to go up to the trial, and I'm going to try and get into the courtroom. All right. So I thought strategically it'd be best to try and find a day which was as quiet as possible. So I chose a particularly quiet day when there was just going to be some cross-examining in the morning, and then there was going to be some explanation to the jury in the afternoon. So I took the train up to Manchester. It was a beautiful summer's day in June 2024. And there were a few delays. So unfortunately, I didn't get there before the start of the trial in the morning. But I went from the train station. I took a taxi from the train station. I had no idea where Manchester Crown Court was, but the taxi driver took me there. And again, it was very strange because you've seen it on the TV so many times, and there was this sort of horrible 1970s court building, and it was quite a quiet day. There wasn't a lot going on when I went in through the entrance and went through all the security. But I do remember there's the TV screen, and it said sort of Court 7, Lucy Letby, and I thought, isn't that interesting in itself? So I got actually to the doors of Court 7, and of course it said on the door, court full, no entry, and I thought, forget this. I thought, and I said a little prayer. I thought, please. So I said, I'm going to go in, and I'm going to see if there's any way I can stay. So I walked into the courtroom, and it was sort of like being hit by this incredible atmosphere. And of course, the clerk of the court met me at the door, and I looked over at the public gallery, and I could see one spare seat. There was one spare seat available, and I looked at the clerk of the court, and I looked at the seat, and I pointed at it as if that's my seat. I'm going to my seat. And the guy didn't he didn't challenge me. He said, "Oh, okay, well, that's fine. Off you go." So I managed to get into the actual courtroom, and I think it's a bit like those of you who been to the centre court at Wimbledon. The centre court at Wimbledon is absolutely tiny. It's so much smaller than you'd ever imagine. And it was the same with the court. The court was absolutely tiny. It was a very, very small room, absolutely full to the brim with people. And it just had this air of total claustrophobia. It was such a claustrophobic, intense atmosphere. And the first thing that hit me was actually seeing the judges, and as seeing Judge Goss. There he was, exactly as I'd seen him on TV, and to see the barristers, Ben Myers and Nicholas Johnson, and just everything going on around you. The other thing which is so compelling is actually to see the jury, because obviously you hear about the jury, but there, when you're actually in court, there are the jury themselves, and just the ordinariness of the people who are got this enormous responsibility of judging a criminal. So that in itself was really interesting. The other thing, which of course was completely different, was that you actually heard the name of this was obviously Baby K. If you tortured me to within an inch of my life, I could never tell you what the name of the baby was, because I just didn't absorb it. But so she wasn't referred to as Baby K. She was referred to by her normal name. And the other thing was that this was a day when witnesses who wanted to remain anonymous were being cross-examined. So we had this extraordinary situation where there were the screens around the court, and people were coming in and being cross-examined behind screens. So that again was all very, very strange. But the main reason I wanted to be in court was to see Lucy herself, because I'd realised that obviously this was the last time potentially that any of us would ever see her, because if she will never come out of prison if we're not successful. And so that in itself was really, really important. But the thing that hit you first was that the dock was raised up on a platform above the court and was completely surrounded by thick bulletproof glass. I mean, it really is very intimidating. So she is there behind thick bulletproof glass, and she's surrounded by 3 prison officers at all times. And on the day she wasn't giving evidence, so she was in sort of prison clothing. The first thing I really wanted to see was what the effect and the impact it had had on her personally. You know, I was expecting that she may look really, really gaunt. She may look really, but actually, you know, I was really encouraged that, you know, I remember thinking she's still got some light in her eyes. She, you know, she still seems to have fight in her, and that was really reassuring. Um, she does look a lot older. Obviously, we see pictures of her when she was 25, and she's now 35, and she is 10 years older. But I was really reassured that she didn't look physically that this horrendous experience has had as much impact on her as I thought. Um, I think I spent most of my time sort of looking at her intently and thinking, you know, just trying to, I mean, as you would when you're seeing somebody in true life, you know, and knowing so much about her, I just thought to myself, how have you managed to get through this? And what an extraordinary, how incredible, really. The other thing is that she did. I mean, there's been a lot of how cold she was, how unresponsive she was, how detached she appeared in the first trial, and certainly on the day I was there, she seemed quite at ease, actually, surprisingly. Obviously, she was just listening to what was going on, but I certainly didn't get the impression that others had had.
Yes.
I think something I do want to share with you, and is something which makes me quite emotional, is that at the very end of the day, when she was being taken down for the last time, and I just looked at her, and I'm unmarried. I haven't got any children. I haven't got any families. I rarely make profound promises to people, but silently I looked at her and I said, I made this promise to her. I said, whatever happens, I'm going to stick with you until this is resolved, and I am going to do everything I possibly can to see that you get justice. And it was an absolute profound promise that I made to her, and something that I will stick by, and I hope up till now that I've managed to achieve. And that was something that was really important to me, to have seen her and to just to silently promise her that I would stick by her until the end.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing all of that. Obviously, I feel the same way. I mean, I will do the same. I mean, it's very clear to me that this is the most important thing I will do in my life. I mean, if I did anything more important than this, then Lord only knows what it would be.
Yeah.
So I will. I mean, I feel emotional about what's happened as well. It's awful, and I think this. I think perhaps the most awful thing about it is you know that it could happen to someone else. I mean, this could just happen all over again. It has happened previously. So if we don't address this, even those people that are watching this who still believe that Lucy Letby is guilty for some bizarre reason, they have to understand they could find themselves in this situation, and their children could find themselves in this situation. It's very, very. Imagine how you would feel if your, adult child, all they were doing a job. Lucy's got this thing in the paper from her parents. We're so
Yeah.
proud of you when you pass her degree course. So you think she's gone the right path in life. She's, and I know because I've spoken to people who know her personally. They were super proud of her, like immensely proud of her. She's their only child. So imagine going from that, and then you see her in the hospital, and then she's gone off to a new place, Chester, that she doesn't know, and she's made her way with that, and she's qualified to be a neonatal nurse, which is difficult. And she's doing everything fine. Then all of a sudden, you hear your child's been taken out of their job, and they've got concerns about your child, and then you just watch this series of events occurring. Um, that, if you're watching this video now and you have an adult child, please be advised that can happen to your child.
Mm.
And you can watch your child go through that and you will be powerless to do anything. Because once the machinery of the police and the Crown Prosecution Service and the criminal justice system and the judiciary get their teeth into your child, you won't be able to do anything. So that primarily is why we're having this conversation today. It's not about Lucy, although we feel strongly about what's happened to Lucy, but it has broader implications that cannot be ignored. Simple as that.
That is absolutely right. I mean, and it's just the way it escalates at an absolutely frightening rate, and suddenly you're absolutely out of control, and suddenly you find everything is against you when the evidence doesn't suggest it. And it's you just beggars belief that you can find yourself in this situation. And I think the thing about Lucy was that she, at every stage, she completely cooperated with all the police questioning, because throughout it she thought, well, it's important that I cooperate with them because then they'll understand that I'm innocent. And she wouldn't have cooperated the way she did if she had been guilty. I mean, she just wouldn't have done. And everything, despite everything pointing to her innocence, she still found herself in this absolutely unimaginable situation. And as you say, it can happen to anybody, and that is the frightening thing. And then, again, that is why, after this has happened, finally, once and for all, we've just got to properly address all the quite obvious flaws that occurred in this case.
Yeah. I think for me, if I was in this situation, it wouldn't so much losing my liberty and being in prison that would bother me. Obviously, that's not great, but I would just get on with it. But it would be the injustice of thinking, why I'm in this situation that I can't do anything about. I know I'm right. You just, I mean, she's sitting there now in prison in Bronzewell every day, just having to exist in a room. I don't know how long are they allowed out for an hour a day for exercise or something. I don't know.
Mm.
Um, just locked in your room, and you just cannot. It's and she can't just say to the guard, "Look, obviously, clearly, I'm innocent. Just let me out." No,
Yeah.
I've been here 6 years, 5 years now. I should mention, by the way, while I remember, because I forgot to mention this earlier. So we're recording this on Wednesday, the 5th of November. So Lucy's 5-year anniversary is on Friday, the 7th. So when you view this video, it will have passed. But I just thought I'd mention that. But yeah, she could be in. She can and will be in a cell now, just sitting there thinking, when can I get out of here?
Mm.
Like it's like being. It's like if someone said to you, I mean, this isn't even as bad, but it's like if someone said to you tomorrow, you cannot leave your house. You won't starve.
Mm.
You won't be dehydrated to death, but you're not allowed to go out ever again. That's it. The door's locked on you and you just have to exist in your house. I mean, it's just, I mean, you know why this is a mistake. And they say, oh no, we've got all the papers here. The papers say you have to be kept in your house indefinitely.
Mm.
It's absolutely crazy. It's absolutely crazy. I mean, I didn't go into this naive, but I did to some extent naively believe that you would get a fair trial, but particularly over something like this. I could see for a lesser charge, it might not be as high profile, but for something like this, where it's one of the most important trials that's happened in recent years, arguably one of the most important trials ever in Britain, and yet the stuff that's been put in court is so shoddy and pathetic, and it's produced this unbelievably, chronically, very obviously unsafe conviction, and it was also avoidable.
Mm.
It just beggars belief. It really does. Anyway,
Peter Hitchen actually described it as a living death, and it is really, because essentially, if we're not successful, and she will literally be age 35, she will be in prison until she dies, and the thought of that is just beyond comprehension, really.
yeah, it's unthinkable. I mean, it's not going to happen because we'll get her out, but it's she's already had 10 years gone. I mean, she's had the best physical years of her life gone, really. So it's awful. It's awful. But yeah, I must ask you some more questions because we've got a few
Yeah.
left to go through. So, um, we want to talk about the pre-trial meeting. So you mentioned that this to me is obviously very important. So could you explain a bit more about that, why it's important, and the experience that you have with it?
So actually, the pre-trial meeting in either civil or criminal cases is absolutely the absolute crux of the case. So in civil cases, about 99.5% will settle before trial, and those that get close to trial, the majority will be settled by the outcome of the pre-trial expert witness meeting. So as I say, in civil cases, this will resolve most cases, but it is equally important in criminal cases, even if it's going to trial. So I'll just very quickly talk a little bit about what happens in both a civil case and a criminal case before it gets to trial. So in a civil case, if you I'm a GP expert. If you are unhappy about your care from a GP, you will go to a solicitor. It's called the pre-action stage of the claim. They will write something called a letter of claim. The GP will receive it. They will respond to it. And the pre-action stage, often it can be resolved. So if clear negligence has occurred, the defence will say, yeah, clearly something's gone wrong here. We'll settle it very early. Alternatively, sometimes the defence can have such a strong defence, it's quite obvious that nothing went wrong. They can put it to the claimant and they will go away because it's a no-win, no-fee. So if they continue with a case which hasn't got any merit, the solicitor won't be paid anything. So early in a case, a lot of disputes are resolved very early. In criminal cases, I suppose the equivalent is that a criminal would be a defendant would be arrested and questioned before they're actually charged. So there is a period of where you are arrested and you know that you can be rearrested, but you've not yet been charged. In the civil case, if it is going to go into the court process, then you have to issue something called you issue court proceedings, and a document is prepared called the particulars of claim, and that will outline the facts of the case, and then will outline the very detailed allegations against the defendant. All right. The equivalent, I suppose, for the criminal side is that you have charges made against you, and you're formally charged with an offence, and then obviously things proceed from there. Now, after the in the civil courts, a case has been a claim has been issued, or in the case of a criminal case, charges have been issued. There is then sort of exchange of court documents. Usually there is a defence. There's usually exchange of witness statements. And in a civil case, it may be resolved at that stage. However, if you get to the point where you're likely to go to a trial, then you have to have an experts meeting. It's absolutely mandatory. No trial ever occurs without a pre-trial meeting of experts. So what is the purpose of a pre-trial expert meeting? So the purpose of it is to narrow down the issues and to fully define the issues that are in dispute. So what is necessary before you go to trial is to have as clear as possible idea of exactly what is going to be disputed and what is going to be negotiated in court. So what actually happens is that the barristers on each side, so the defence and the prosecution barristers, both submit a series of questions to the experts that they want answering. So obviously one side is going to be difficult for the other and vice versa. So these questions are very important. They're put on something called the agenda. So before we have an experts meeting, there is an agenda of exactly what's going to be discussed. And what you then have to do is to address the questions, and a surprising number you will actually be able to find some agreement, or find some you can actually settle whatever the issue is between you. All right. However, there will be issues which you can't agree, and what you then have to do is to formally explain your reasons for there being a disagreement between the experts. And what you have to do is to formally put that into this minutes of the meeting. So it's very clear to the barristers exactly why you disagree. All right. And in civil cases, and then you have to sign it off, agree it and sign it off. And these documents obviously go to the court and go to the barristers. So what is so interesting in this case, in civil cases, you always have like for like. So if you have a GP expert, you'll have another GP expert. Almost invariably, the experts will be matched. What I've discovered in criminal cases, because there is such a difference is that you will have sometimes, I believe in Lucy's case, she had 2 defense experts and there were 6 or 7 prosecution experts. For the Colin Campbell case, it was even worse. Colin Campbell only had 2 defense experts and there were 10 on the prosecution side. Now that is really, really dangerous, because if there are key issues which are unopposed, so you've got an expert who is not opposed by another expert, then by default, often key issues can be accepted on the prosecution side simply because there isn't a defendant expert to dispute them. So effectively, if there's no defense expert to dispute the issue, then the prosecution expert evidence can suddenly become incredibly persuasive, because a jury hasn't anything to contrast it with.
Yeah.
And then we saw this obviously in Lucy's case, in that there was no expert insulin evidence at all. So she actually had to accept that somebody had poisoned the babies with insulin, and that obviously was absolutely devastating at trial, because she had to accept that there had been poisoning of the babies.
Yeah. So there's something, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but something I've often wondered about the court case is that you obviously have this pre-trial meeting and you agree, right, we're basically going to talk about this during the trial. So there's a point in the trial where Dr. Gwen Walk is saying some stuff. Now, she'd already written an academic paper with Professor Vincent Marks in which she contradicted everything that she said in the trial. So could you just get that paper, and because it's external to the trial in a sense, could you just get that paper and say, right, Dr. Walk, did you write this paper? Yes. And then just go to. Is there any reason you can't do that?
No, not at all.
Right. So
why did Ben Myers do that or not? I don't know about this.
Why didn't this happen?
I have no idea, because if there is evidence,
why didn't he get like a note writing expert to come on the stand and say this isn't a profession then?
Like many things in the trial, I have no idea. But if she'd written a paper which contradicted what she'd said at trial, then obviously that if it had been if that paper had been available and she'd been questioned on it, then that would have been very interesting.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm just gonna get my dog out. Pete.
Okay.
Right, you're going out now. Out. One. In you go. Okay. Right, that's the last time she's come in here for an interview. Getting around in a circle. Um, so yeah. So there's a paper by Gwen Walk with Professor Vincent Marks, and it contradicts what she said in the court case. And I've always wondered, why can't you just get hold of that paper and just literally read? You can throw her out the case. You could literally just destroy her in the case. She's just gone because you can just go through it and say, "Did you write this?" She'd have to say yes, and then you'd say,
Mm,
"Why did you write this?" and why are you now saying the opposite?
mm.
She'd have a very difficult job on to explain that, I would say. So I've always wondered about that. I've always wondered why they didn't get an expert in to say this isn't a confession note, um, and several other things. And you've kind of answered well, you have answered my question. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. So it seems to me, observing it, what portions of the trial we've been able to get hold of, and then obviously there's the court reporting. It seems to me that Ben Myers relied almost entirely on his cross-examination, which, while he's a good cross-examiner, when you're up against numerous doctors from the hospital, then numerous expert witnesses, albeit most of them didn't really do very much, in all honesty. But nevertheless, for him to think I'm going to defeat them all on my own seems unlikely. So I've
Well,
never.
it's even beyond that, isn't it? Because Judge Goss actually said that the jury were not to take anything that the barrister, what Ben Myers presented in court, as evidence, and therefore they had to actually. I think I'm right on this, aren't I? That
I think
that they should discount anything. So they were only to take. Um, they were only to actually act on expert evidence, and of course, when she didn't supply any expert evidence, then essentially she had no defense.
yeah, yeah. So with regard to that, let's talk about Professor Hall. So I think we've all got a bit of an impression now of why he might not have been called in the court case and how he would have matched up against Dr. Evans. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt about it. He's an extremely pleasant and likable chap, and he's a very, very eminent paediatrician. In fact, I think I used his textbook when I was a medical student, so he's a very eminent chap. However, being an eminent paediatrician doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good expert witness. And I think the main the main problem was that he was just too open and didn't really what you have to do by the time something gets to court, you must obviously be unbiased, independent, and look at all possibilities, but at the end of the day you do need to have a clear opinion, and you've got to be able to stand by that opinion. And certainly, having listened to the interview he did with Liz Hull quite recently and the interviews he had on Panorama, um, he said things like you couldn't rule out air embolism as a cause of death, um, which obviously, if you say that in front of somebody like Nicholas Johnson, means that you're just about to be absolutely pulverized, really. Um, and other issues, he appeared quite sort of unclear, and he would have left the jury with the feeling that they didn't fully understand his opinion. You've got, as an expert witness, you've got to really explain and leave the jury in absolutely no doubt what your opinion is. And I think that is what would have happened if he had been. Um, so his lack of clear conviction as would have contrasted so much with Dewi Evans, because Dewi Evans, for all his woeful inadequacies, was absolutely unflinching in his opinion, and as far as the jury is concerned, it was obviously very, very convincing. And that's really what it all boiled down to, is that the experts would have had to convince the jury of their opinion. And I think possibly Mike Hall's, if he had been cross-examined, would not have managed to do that.
Hmm. So I had a thought and a feeling that if Professor Hall had been called, for example, in the case of Child C, which we know is a bowel obstruction. It's a very obvious bowel obstruction. It's got all the classic symptoms of a bowel obstruction. That case is total rubbish, what came from the prosecution. Um, would, could he have been called and given this, he presumably would have said this is a bowel obstruction. Would that have helped?
Well, I think it sort of goes to the absolute heart of the Lucy Letby case, which is essentially because she had so many. Was it 18 or 19 babies on the indictment? Was it? Do you know the
17.
exact number?
I think it's 17, yeah. It's A to Q, isn't it? So
And
it's
then there was certainly baby K. They couldn't reach a verdict. Is that right? And then there was a couple that she was found not guilty. Is that right?
yes, H in the original trial is H, J, K, and I believe Q. Don't quote me on the Q because it hardly ever gets discussed. But H, J, and K definitely she was found not guilty, or they couldn't reach a verdict.
Okay. So I think what clearly Ben Myers saw was that this was going to be an absolutely polarizing situation. So either he had to convince the jury that she was entirely innocent, or that she was in, and because if she was found guilty of even one or two or three of the cases, she was going to get a whole life sentence in any case. So I suppose it was down to whether calling Dr. Hall for various things like the case you've described would have helped overall in their opinion that she was completely innocent. So I think essentially she was only ever going to succeed if it was possible to show that she was entirely innocent.
Mm.
If she was, and all of us have said that if any of us felt that she had harmed any of the babies, none of us would support her. So I think that's probably the reason why he decided with Dr. Hall Professor Hall to either go for. It wasn't going to be helpful that he brought Dr. Hall in for a couple of cases, but not all of them. And so he either had to involve him fully or not involve him at all.
Okay.
Is that fair, do you think?
Well, I mean, you're better placed to assess that than me. My only feeling was they used this chain link technique, kind of, that was previously in the Lucinda Burt case. And also, I've been assessing the closing statement of Nick Johnson, so I've just done a bit more recently. And what he does all the way through the court case, and particularly in the closing statement, is try to draw together cases and say, oh, look, all these cases are the same, then all these cases are the same. It's all rubbish, of course. But so I just wonder if they could have, if they could have called Professor Hall, and if Professor Hall had given evidence on certain of the very, very, very weak cases, and they, I mean, already H, J, K, and Q are gone out of the 17. Then there's child C. There's an obvious bowel obstruction. There's the milk vomiting case. There's one case where the infant is highly premature as well. And child D, there's very obvious medical errors. There's lots of weak cases. I mean, they're virtually all weak cases, to be fair. But child N is another extraordinary case. Extraordinary. Um, if he could have weakened these, perhaps, that might have helped. Is my only thought. I don't know. It's very hard for me to say, having never been in court and witnessed a court case. I just wonder if they'd broken the chain a bit more, it might have helped. I don't know. Very hard for me to say.
It all really depends on how well he performed, because if he didn't react well to cross-examination and he'd come across unclear or been too open to Nicholas Johnson's sort of barristerial attacks, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's just one of those things where but as I say, certainly if we know that the judge said that the jury were not to take anything from the barristerial evidence, it all had to come from expert evidence. And clearly, if there was no expert evidence, then Lucy never had a chance at all. And
Hmm.
I believe that is the case. I think Judge Goss was very clear that it needed expert evidence,
Hmm.
and without any expert evidence, it was very difficult to see that she could ever succeed.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, so speaking of expert evidence, let's talk a bit more about Dr. Evans. So it, it's hard to know where to start with this gentleman, as we know. His conduct has been extraordinary. When I began this 2.5 years ago, I would have had the idea of what an expert witness would be in my mind, and it's someone who's, surgical, forensic, professional, composed, all of these things. And then I'm still obviously I'm used to Dr. Evans now. I'm accustomed to what he's like, but I'm staggered by how far away he is from the image of what I would expect. Um, so anyway, I just would love to hear as much as you have to say about him in terms of your opinion of him as a witness and his conduct, I guess.
I think we can break it down to his performance as an expert witness and his sort of personality and his personal traits. I mean, certainly the very first interview he ever did, he sort of described the duties of an expert witness to the court very, very clearly and succinctly. However, after that, basically all his actions were completely opposite to what you'd expect from an expert witness. And as I say, I mean, my very first opinion of him was that this was entirely different to anything I'd ever really experienced in terms of how experts are expected to behave or how they do behave. So what was so extraordinary was his complete closed opinion that the only cause of death must be murder, and that he wasn't even really able to consider any other possibilities at all. He didn't make any attempt to think wider. So, for example, at one stage he described babies as not just well, but very, very well. I've seen that in the transcripts. His theory that babies never go off unexpectedly. You can always predict when a baby is going to go off. And obviously the consultants at the Countess of Chester also verified this opinion, which obviously coming from Dewi Evans would appear to be very, very powerful, particularly if it was completely unopposed, and also from the consultant. But anyone knows that a baby is incredibly vulnerable, and if you could predict when they were going to go off, then you wouldn't even need to monitor them. And clearly,
I always found that ridiculous. I mean, you would always know what was going to happen in the hospital. Like you'd be able to say to parents, almost from the moment they came in, "Oh, don't worry, your baby's going to be fine." Or alternatively, "Well, I wouldn't hang around too much because your baby's definitely going to die."
yes, yes.
Just absolutely ludicrous.
And then also, so the innate vulnerability of these 27-week-old babies, and some of the babies were incredibly small. Of course, there was going to be possible other causes for their deaths rather than just criminal activity. So I just found that extremely difficult. But of course, if that's all the jury heard and that's their own experience, then they were going to believe Dewi Evans more than they were going to. So that's what made it extremely persuasive to the jury. The other thing that I found very interesting, Phil Hammond interviewed him and asked him, had he got any other support from any other paediatricians anywhere? And of course, it's well known that there is absolutely nobody else that he's been able to find who supports him. I mean, we've got Dr. Yoxall from the Women's Hospital, who we now also know is a very, very good friend of Stephen Breary. But otherwise, there hasn't been anybody else who is come out to strongly support the position that he's taken throughout everything.
Even Dr. Yoxall, we should be clear, has just done some crappy statistics about the tubes. He hasn't really specifically come out and supported Dr. Evans. We should be clear on that.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, you're right on that. Nothing actually is directly
Hmm.
attributable to anything that Dr. Evans said at trial. I suppose the thing about his personality is that I'm somebody who's usually very open and friendly, and I very rarely take a sort of instant dislike to somebody. But when I very first saw him in the Good Morning Britain interview, he just everything about him was unlikable, really. Um, and clearly, he has a sort of almost a sort of narcissistic, psychopathic attitude to the way he presents, and this has become increasingly obvious. As I say, his behaviour and his answers in recent interviews has got increasingly bewildering. Really, I just have never ceased to be surprised by some of the things he's come out with, and it just absolutely astonishing. I mean,
I think unhinged is the word.
absolutely. But then I think the other thing about him is that he's clearly made it clear that he um, has financial interests in the case. I mean, obviously, I'm an expert witness; I get paid for what I do, but my overriding interest is in doing a good job. And whenever I write a report or do any work, I take pride in making sure that it's very good. Um, he has said things like, you know, there's an interview he did with the psychiatrist where he literally said that you know this was his private work and that it funded his children through university, and clearly that shows that he was very interested in the financial side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. What did you make of his performance in the Channel 4 documentary?
Well, I thought it was I thought it was very interesting because I actually went to the premiere itself, so I saw it in the cinema, and obviously could see what the reaction of people around me was. But I thought the part where he was where he was filmed when Shu Lee asked his three sort of questions of what he would ask Dr. Evans if he had the opportunity was absolutely incredible, really, and his reaction was quite extraordinary, really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I found it. I mean, I knew it was coming when I watched the documentary, but I still found it incredible. I mean, I've said it's not the best analogy really, but I've mentioned previously that if I'd written as an example, if I'd written a book and then you had a panel of the world's most famous authors, or in my view, the most highly regarded writers, in my view, the highly regarded writers are all dead, but never mind. And you know, if they were holding a panel and saying, right, we're going to talk about Chris's book for 2 hours, I would not ignore it. I would. It would hurt me if they said bad things, and it would be great if they said good things. But I certainly wouldn't ignore it and just think, well, I'm obviously right about my book. I don't need to hear their opinion. I find that incredible. But of course, that's a really bad analogy because for the medical field, it's far more important. It's far more important for you to hear the views of your peers. And to describe them as his peers is not even accurate because they're so far above him. I mean, Colin Morley said he wouldn't be fit to make them a cup of tea, basically. Um,
Mm.
you know, the fact that I believe him, I believe him when he said, I've never watched this panel before,
Yeah,
which is extraordinary considering they're talking about his work and they're the top people in the world. And
yeah,
that sums him up, I think, better than anything. It just is this absolute bulletproof belief that he's right, even when he's very, very obviously wrong. It's just incredible, incredible. Anyway, want to ask you one final question because you've got a bit of a story here, and I know you have some views on this. So this has been a complete debacle for the healthcare system, and the people that perhaps has the most serious consequences for are healthcare professionals and nurses. So I wanted to ask you about that and the NHS going forward. And I know you've got a story about a urologist as well.
yeah. I've always said that, as I say, the, the personal impact on Lucy, but the most important thing that we've got to talk about is the consequences of this to healthcare professionals. And I always start by saying, if you were an ambitious young neonatal nurse and you wanted to have a big career as a neonatal nurse, would you really do advanced training? Would you really qualify as a senior nurse, look after the sickest babies, when there is then the possibility that if there are adverse outcomes, if a baby dies unexpectedly, you could be accused of murder? And obviously, after the Lucy Letby case, the possibility that if something goes wrong and you're involved, you could be accused of murder and it could have the consequences it's had for Lucy, would mean that anyone would not wish to do to pursue a high-risk career in any medical field. And what we're now seeing is that increasingly, and I mean, obviously it started before Lucy Letby, but defensive medicine is becoming absolutely prevalent now, and people just do not want to take on anything that could be risky, could have bad outcomes, could have serious consequences, because clearly this means that there could be criminal allegations against them, which absolutely nobody is willing under any circumstances to take that sort of risk. So the big problem is that in high risk areas of medicine, we are likely to see really big staff shortages. And so the very people who in the ideal world, and as I say, even when I started in medicine, and certainly in my father's day, you took the rough with the smooth, you expected people to be understanding, you expected that if things went wrong, you wouldn't be particularly necessarily be liable. But now the precedence that is set in this case is quite extraordinary, really, because people who are involved in high risk specialities are simply not going to want to stay there. And even if you are in a particular speciality, and you mentioned urology, you would only want to be in the low risk areas, and you would not be wanting to take on particular procedures or particular areas where there's likely to be a poor outcome and you could be held liable. So I just think that the wider implications of this are so enormous, so colossal, that we've just got to appease this. We've got to ensure that people do not feel that they are, and of course, because the precedence has been set with Lucy, it's going to be very, very difficult to row back now. And having happened once, people are never going to be reassured that they're protected in the future.
And I think one of the things about this is we've seen how abysmally, atrociously whistleblowers are treated as well. So then you're dealing with an area of life. I mean, this should apply across all areas of life, but it's particularly important with healthcare and medical system. People have to be allowed to make mistakes, but then you have to be willing to examine those mistakes when they happen. So it seems to me that you're creating a culture in which this is less and less likely to occur. It's less and less likely that people are going to want to make mistakes, and then it's less and less likely that you're going to dispassionately assess those mistakes. And essentially, that's calamitous, isn't it?
Absolutely, and of course, you don't want to own up to a mistake. I mean, what I was involved in it was a movement that started in about 2003 called open disclosure, and this was something which was very, very trendy about sort of 20 years ago now, where if something went wrong, you were encouraged to highlight it. Everyone had a completely open and honest discussion about it. Lessons were learnt, and actually, it was found that litigation was lower in situations where if something went wrong, you owned up to it quickly and involved the patient entirely. But of course, if there could be dire consequences, if something comes out, then you're not going to want to disclose it. And of course, no lessons are going to be learned. And of course, it makes the the blame culture even worse, because people just don't want to own up to anything, because the consequences could be just so dire. So unless you fundamentally change the situation, as we tried to do 20 years ago, and people, errors and problems are looked at openly and dispassionately, we're going to be in a terrible situation going forward. And if anything, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
Okay, well, I think that's a good place to end the interview. It's a nice note to end on. I think we can't have a more illustrative way to end. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for joining me today, and thanks for everything you've done for Lucy. And we'll definitely get you back in the future, and we'll probably get viewers to ask you questions, and I'm sure I'll have some more questions by then. So yeah, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you
Thank you
again.
very much. It's been a huge pleasure, and I hope very soon that we'll have good news and Lucy will be back with us. So that's all our aims. And thank you for everything you've done, the amazing work that you've been involved with. So thank you.
No problem. Thanks. Bye now.